Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Manage Your Revenue Cycle with Effective Intelligence in 2022. 5 trends that will drive adoption of automation, data accessibility, and employee effectiveness. This webinar will be presented by Matt Seefeld, MedEvolve's EVP and Head of Effective Intelligence Solutions. And I am Ashley Deitch, VP of Marketing for MedEvolve. I just have a few quick instructions before I hand it to Matt. All attendees are on mute. But we do encourage questions and comments throughout the presentation. So you should see a control panel to the right of your screen. If you don't see it, you should be able to access it from a menu from the top of your screen. And you can submit your questions there anytime throughout the presentation. Matt will do his best to address them either at the time, if he notices it, or at the end of the presentation. So we would love for this to be an interactive presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and I will send a follow-up email to everyone who is registered with a link to the video. And now I'm going to shut off my camera and let Matt take it from here.
Thanks, Ashley. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for grabbing a few minutes to talk about a new concept, a new topic around effective intelligence. Just by way of background, I spent my whole career in RCM, rev cycle, healthcare consulting, technology development, mainly focused in the financial side of revenue cycle, focused in workflow automation and analytics solutions. At MedEvolve here, I'm the Executive Vice President. I oversee data science, RCM, our automation development team, effective intelligence solutions, and biz dev. I do sit on some boards, and I am a founder of My Lifelink, which is a free virtual community app to help those that are suffering from addiction, whether it be physical, emotional, and or behavioral. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the challenges, at least that I see, going forward in 2022 and some beyond. We're going to focus first on staffing challenges, which I'm sure everybody can attest has been a challenge with the pandemic. We're going to talk about automation and transparency. We're going to talk about data accessibility, which is a really, really important topic today. The financial experience for the consumer and margin. Right? There's no margin, there's no mission. Really, the takeaway here is to introduce this new concept of EIQ, effective intelligence quotients, and how you will be able to build those and use those to look at how efficient and effective your labor team is, as well as your revenue cycle. So, got a couple polls that we're going to do. What type of organization are you with? If you want to just make a note. I will start to read as the poll distribution happens. So hospital, health system, AMCs, if you're physician owned, private equity owned, EMS, I know there's some EMS folks out there. So right now it looks like 78% private practice. We've got about 14% consultants, welcome consultants, 20% consultants, about 7% private equity, 7% hospital, some other. So that's great. That's great to see the diversity on this call. Okay, we're going to dive in now to our first trend, staffing challenges. I normally would say if I was on stage, raise your hand if you've had a lot of fun trying to hire and retain staff since April of 2020. The labor shortages are real. A lot of folks we know have chosen not to go back to work or change the way they work or change the industry or change the lifestyle. We're seeing a huge jump in wages. MedEvolve has its own RCM company, right? So we're seeing it firsthand. We're also seeing family pressures, right? Closed schools. We've got more flexibility in work-life balance. Difficulty with childcare. So there's lots and lots of things, opening and closing businesses, reshuffling populations from different industries. Fear, of course, virus, favorite face-to-face, especially in the medical practices, and mandates. So, at the end of the day, there's a lot of macro things that are happening that are impacting our ability to not only identify, hire, but retain good people. The challenge that this industry has always had is there's no easy way, or at least hasn't been, to identify the effective people, the ones that you can't afford to lose, the ones that you need to make sure have compensation and incentives aligned with their performance. But you also can't afford to retain non-effective people, right? That are a drain on the P&L. So it's really, really important, a theme that we're going to talk about throughout the webinar today. You look at competition. I'm not going to go through all of these. I think we've heard it. You've got Amazon out there offering lots of money, tuition, Starbucks, baristas can make more than a medical biller, in some cases a coder. Not that I would want to make Americanos all day long, but everything seems to be push button there, so that might be okay. And then the great resignation, right? A lot of folks have decided to retire early. They're going to change their life. The pandemic gave them a new reflection, a new purpose, and so those are things that obviously are out of our control. If you look at some of these MGMA stats, 73% of medical practices rank staffing as their biggest challenge. I can tell you, I've spoken at a couple conferences already this year. I've met with a lot of our large groups, practices, and we're hearing the same thing. A lot of groups are leaning towards outsourcing because of that challenge, which I'll talk about momentarily. And then you look at the other stat there, 76% of medical practice report making operational changes here due to, right? So how do you make changes due to the shortage of staff? We do it through automation. You do it through removing labor dependency from your revenue cycle in every area that you can, right? That's imperative to look at. COVID has changed the way we work. I mean, I used to travel every week, like 3 or 4 million miles flown domestically, running around this country. I don't travel nearly that anymore. So my work-life balance, being able to coach youth sports, be more engaged in the community with the family, right? I mean, I want flexibility, right? Everybody seems to want flexibility, which is important because we can still be very productive and effective remote. The challenge for healthcare is how do you monitor remote staff and ensure that you're getting the financial outcome that you expect with as minimal work effort as you expect, right? And that's a really, really big thing. And then, of course, recruiting and retaining top talent. You've got to be able to offer flexible work models. Like, we recruit outside of the state of Arkansas now. A lot of the people we're bringing on board, they live in different states. They can work from anywhere because we have the tools to measure how effective they are. So another poll, just curious, how has your organization implemented a work at home option? No, not at all. You're considering it? Yes, for some. Fully virtual, hybrid, or other. So it's looking like right out of the gate, hybrid and virtual. It's about half, 53%. Considering it, another 20%. Fully virtual, 13%. Kudos to you. That's awesome. And then 19% no. So it's good distribution there. So let's talk about organizations who have adopted outsource. We had more clients come to us last year saying, "I'm done. I'm giving you rev cycle. Please take it." I get it. My people are your people is what I say. Let me deal with the HR burden of hiring and firing and managing remote staff and all those things. And so a lot of private practices, health systems, and other have decided to outsource. Here's the challenge with outsourcing is what level of transparency do you have into how effective your outsource partner is? What access to real-time information are they going to give you, or do they have the capability of giving? That's a big requirement when you choose to outsource. And don't just go for the cheapest. Never works out well. So really, really important decisions that are being made this year and going forward as to whether outsourcing might be the right full outsource or hybrid outsource might be the right strategy for the practice. So we're going to talk about automation and intelligence. Again, when you have a shortage of labor, we have to look for ways to improve automation, which will reduce our labor dependence on collecting what you're supposed to collect on time. And so when we had to actually do a reset back in 2018 to get our RCM business back in sync. And so that's what predicated the development of a lot of our cloud-based workflow automation technology and analytics technology so that we could make informed real-time decisions on staff as well as performance. So when the pandemic hit, thankfully, we already had these tools in place. And so I was able to mobilize all staff immediately to the home. Most have not come back in the office. Some have chosen to come back in a hybrid model if they choose to, but most haven't. And we're able to support that model. We're able to ensure remote staff are not just productive, but effective. There's a big difference between productivity and effectiveness. Making sure that our staff, our business office staff, are accountable. We cannot afford to lose effective employees, right? But we also can't afford to keep one that's not. You have to have the right tools in place to identify the difference. Do more with less. I'm always amazed. I always use the AR example when I go and I meet with potential clients, and I ask them basic questions like how many claims are open on the AR, how many have been worked, how many haven't been worked, how many have been worked 5 or more times with no payment, or they can't answer any of these because PM systems don't do that. And then you start thinking about carve-outs. Why are you looking at claims that don't require intervention? That's silly. Why staff for that? Only look at claims that require intervention today. And some of those claims may require intervention tomorrow, but tomorrow hasn't happened yet. So let's not future seek. So bottom line is automation can actually clean up the work and drive accountability on the worker, right? And what does this all do? It reduces your spend, your labor costs, which starts to drive margin. It's also going to improve your net revenue because you're going to be more effective at collecting your money. Staff morale and accountability. This has been a big thing, obviously, with the pandemic, is making sure that people feel connected, people are being recognized and rewarded for performance, making sure that, we hire less experienced staff with work drivers to guide activities, we customize and assign queues, right? And so you're thinking about ways in which you can set up your back office and your front office. Let's not forget about the whole financial clearance pre-reg process. But basically, is it how do we have the work drivers in place and capture the structured data, which I'll get to here in a minute, to drive that algorithm that says, are you effective? Is my rev cycle effective, and are my people effective? And Ashley's going to give me a free Starbucks gift card if I say effective at least 30 or more times in this webinar, so I think I'm close. Virtual communication for a virtual workforce. I love it when I'm asking clients, when you need somebody along revenue cycle, including physicians, to do something for you to get a claim paid, what do? Well, I write a note, a post-it, a phone call, an email. Sometimes it's face-to-face, but I've been at home recently with pandemic, so it's not. None of that's trackable. You can't hold accountability on anybody for that. So when you think about all of the touches that have to happen to get a claim paid, right? You talk about clean claim pass rates, and everybody likes to say theirs is 97 or 98%. I don't look at clean claim pass rate from just a billing edit or an EDI standpoint. I look at it as the charge was entered and coded when out the door was paid, including patient liability, and is now zero balance with no human intervention. That's clean claim, right? That's no work effort. The challenge is that doesn't make up a whole lot of the payments, right? Most of the payments coming in have to have some human intervention. So the question is how much? And the only way you can know how much is to track everything beyond just what your AR team is putting in the system, right? So we're going to talk about task management here for a moment. If you look at the gap, this was a study done by Deloitte. If you look at the remote workforce and where they're weakest in terms of tools they have access to, task management and productivity tools were the lowest, right? So these are staff are asking for this, right? They need more of this to be effective outside of the workplace, and frankly, inside the workplace too, for those of you that have chosen not to send anybody home yet. You need to, screenshots are a little hard to see here, but at the end of the day, you need to be able to track the things that are being done on that claim, on that service, right, prior to service, pre-registration process, and then when you need folks to help, whether it's a physician or it's a charge entry or a coder or it's a question of payment posting, it's got to be tracked. And it has to be tied to the visit for 100% accountability. So let's talk data, right? So access to the right structured data. So let's see, I've developed 4 workflow management systems in my career. If you had asked me 15 years ago, would PM systems figure out that they need more structured data to identify effective employees and work effort to get paid? I would say absolutely. Guess what? They didn't, and they won't. So your PM and your MR system will never do this. It's just not going to do it, at least not in my time. I might be teaching high school history, hopefully, and coaching football and track in 10 years, and maybe they'll figure it out then. But until then, there's opportunities to fill that gap. So bottom line, folks, is you have to have access to structured data that does not sit in a PM system. That's key. You cannot rely on PM data alone, okay? Once it's structured and it's stored, in our case, in a data warehouse, I can now grab that for advanced analytics around revenue cycle effectiveness and labor effectiveness, okay? When we look at, you can kind of look at this graphic to the right, is that you look at right now, you know, the ecosystem of the PM, the EMR, other systems that you may be using to run your revenue cycle. That data needs to feed a data warehouse. So for our clients, we actually built that and we integrate the data into the warehouse. And then from there is where we start to drive workflow, automation, analytics, reporting, et cetera. So bringing disparate data systems together into a centralized repository is key. Those of you that are larger groups, even smaller groups, you may already have a data warehouse, you may already be doing this. The challenge is that you don't have all the structured data that you need, and it's not in your PM. So let's talk about better financial experiences briefly, right? High deductible plans are not going away. They're only getting worse. You have to have flexibility in payment plans, prompt pay discounts if your contracts allow it, so that the consumer can meet their liability objectives without putting themselves at financial burden, right? We all know the old adage that we'll probably pay the utility bill, we'll put food on the table, car payments, things like that before we pay our healthcare bills, right? So flexibility is key. At the same time, more than half of your revenue out there is coming from patients nowadays. You know, 20 years ago, it didn't matter if the doctor collected, but today it does. So when you start to see an increase of 35% in patient debt over the course of, of the last, say 10 years, that's an accretive amount growing on the AR that used to come in as insurance money. That's not, especially right now, right? We're at February 15th, so you're 45 days into the new year of deductibles. So I look at self-pay a lot. We've developed a lot of mobile engagement around self-pay for our clients. The bottom line is that physicians are still seeing a lot of patients for free. You're seeing patients, you're scheduling surgeries for patients that owe an accretive amount of money to you. Why are you doing that? Right? It's not okay anymore. You guys, physicians have to realize, and provider organizations have to realize that the consumer owes you the money. Just be flexible with how you ask for it. Better ways to pay bills. We talked about this a lot, around just looking at different ways in which you can finance, making sure patients understand that they have flexible ways to pay. Making sure you have accurate pre-registration process is one thing I do want to just bring up, is that pre-registration, or I call financial clearance, one big component of that is estimating the patient liability for the service that's about to be rendered, and then it's collecting it, or at least a material deposit. Also collecting priority balances, and all that should be done prior to the service date. Don't wait for the front office to do it. Front office should literally be a concierge. Welcome, Mr. Seatbelt. Please have a seat, grab some coffee. Your provider will be with you shortly. Not trying to verify benefits and eligibility, checking on pre-search, trying to collect copays, et cetera, et cetera. All right, technology and personal outreach. I used to call it the 10-10 rule. Ashley and I made a joke yesterday when we were revising this slide. It's no longer the 10-10. It's now the 2-10-5 rule. And I'm pretty sure in the next 6 months, it'll probably be the 1-10-5 rule. The bottom line is people aren't answering their phones anymore. I'm not. If I don't know who you are, I don't answer it. Sadly, there are some people who I know and I still don't answer it, but that's my own problem. The intended recipient, right? I'm actually get a hold of the person who owes me the money is still low. And then it's the willingness to pay. Okay, so when you look at this, if you're making phone calls in your business office, stop. You got to use automation, right? People prefer to pay and be notified through e-statements, mobile text, email, right? I know it's hard to believe. I've had a lot of debates with clients like in the urology space who say, well, my population's older, they'll never use it. Guess what? They're the most users, the highest users, right? And so leverage mobile technology if you're not, to collect that money, okay? let's see here. Automate outbound communication. That's another thing. If you're going to make calls, just use a dialer. Right? Don't have a human doing it. Have a human ready to answer when the connect happens, but don't actually dial the patients. If you look at that 2% connect rate, and you called 100 patients in a day, and you're only getting 2 on the phone, and 10% of those, which is not 10% of 2 is not a good number, but you get what I'm saying. It's not worth the effort. And then automating, and then focusing up on account balance and age, right? Focus follow up on that. You know, for your high dollar stuff, it may make sense to make a phone call, right? To try to negotiate, you know, here, you owe this, you're about to be seen again for your follow-up visit. How do we want to pay this? But man, I'll tell you, you know, I see too many clinics staffing 5, 6, 7 people to work self-pay. Not take those folks and put them up front on the financial clearance side to reduce your first pass denials. Digital front doors, a lot of our clients use that. We integrate with a great company, Health iPass, that does mobile check-in, kiosks, portals, pre-reg paperwork, digital this, right? So lots of great ways to pay. A lot of you are using other vendors. That's great. You know, just remember that not everybody's going to follow through on that. You're still going to have probably 50, 60% of your patients coming in that hadn't done any of that. And even if they had done partial pre-registration, they may not have paid you, nor did they verify their insurance. So keep in mind, there still is a financial human involved in making sure your patient's financing is secure prior to service, checking, and I'll get to that here in a little bit. Digital communication, flexible payment, seamless pre-arrival, and faster waiting room and check-in experience. Avoiding denials. So when I say financial clearance, this is what I mean, right? It's basic, but it's hard to do consistently. Most of the clients that I talk to, especially in the sales process, and I ask about your pre-reg, they're decentralized pre-registration, which is not a good place to live, right? When you have multiple people with their hands in verification of eligibility, benefits, COB, demographic verification, which nowadays you got to get an email, you got to get a cell phone number for digital communication, checking referral and auth requirements, estimating patient debt, collecting prior due balance, right? That's a lot of people with their hands in that. The question is, are they doing what they say they're doing, and are they getting the outcome that you expect them to get? Again, structured data needs to be captured on the pre-reg or financial clearance process in order to look at effectiveness. Has to. It's not in your PM. It's never going to be in your PM. So I like the red, yellow, green mentality. It kind of goes from my old consulting days with the big bed boards and patient flow projects I used to do in the academic medical centers. But I just want to know at risk. If it's green, it's good. I trust you. If it's yellow, caution. You may want to potentially reschedule this surgery, this visit. If it's red, stop what you're doing. What is wrong with this scheduled service? What's missing, right? What hasn't been done to protect my revenue on that? Need for greater margin, trend 5. I mean, I don't know if I've ever asked who wants more margin, and people are like, I don't know, maybe next year. No, you want it now, right? I've had physicians say now that the pandemic has really hit, they're thinking about retiring 5 years earlier than they originally had. How can I do that? The challenge I have in this industry is that you have someone saying I want to have a greater need of margin, but they're not willing to look at their people, their process, and the technology alignment to those two things to actually get it. So on one hand, you're saying you want it, but you're not willing to do what it takes to get it, right? So there's a hypocrisy there. But at the end of the day, we've got to look for ways in which we can improve margin. And it's pretty simple in how you do it, but it's hard. It's simple in terms of the things that will impact margin. It's hard to get the people aligned and the tech in place to get there. And we're going to talk really the remainder of the presentation around that concept. So what does it look like, right? I mean, if you have more margin, you're much more attractive to private equity. We have a lot of clients getting bought by private equity. They're getting these crazy multiples on EBITDA. If I can give you another 2 or 3 points on EBITDA, does that make you happy? Yes. Tighter margins is not sufficient for positioning sustainability and growth, right? You can't invest in new technology. You want to build an ASC. You want to expand your MRIs. You want to build a new service line for PTOT, whatever that is, right? You can't do it if you don't have cash to do it. The other thing too is I'm always amazed at how few folks in revenue cycle actually understand the net revenue, the potential net revenue that's being missed out on. They really just don't know. And I see that when we do our sales prospecting and we start working with a sales prospect, we require data to be able to build these ROIs around net revenue improvement and AR, balance sheet improvement. 95% of the time, I can't even get access to good information. And when I do get access to good information, it's taking weeks to get, right? So it's hard to deconstruct on a lot of these PM systems out there that don't offer this transparency, how much you're leaving on the table, okay? We've solved that here. You know, the triangle slide, we're still working on this one. Ashley's laughing right now. But look, at the end of the day, your gross charge really doesn't matter, right? You can bill whatever you want to bill. It's what you collect, and it's how much cost, labor cost it was to collect it. So this whole discussion we're having is around labor effectiveness, and how you measure labor effectiveness is grabbing structured data that's not found in a PM. And it's taking that structured data, which we use workflow automation to do, plus your PM data to tell you that story of effectiveness. That's the left side of the triangle, right? That's going to reduce your labor dependence. Automation reduces your labor dependence. Better process aligned with technology reduces your labor dependence. On the right side is your net collection rate, right? Looking at your net charge and what your payments are against that net charge. Okay, so now what's interesting there is there's lots of ways. When I sometimes will walk in, I'll ask a doctor and say, you know, if you bill $1 and you expect 96 cents back and you get 90 cents, do you wonder why? And usually he or she will say, well, how do you know I'm only getting 90? And then I'll go back and say, well, you're probably getting 85. And they'll say, wait, what? And the fact that you don't know is a challenge, right? That's scary. So what is being left on the table, right? What is a non-contractual that's being taken that could have been converted to cash, to collections, right? You have effective labor pool, right? You have good process and good people aligned with the right technology, and guess what? Your labor dependence or cost drops, and your net collection rate goes up, which is where you get the wide margin of below. So this is a really important to think about these themes as you look at your 2022 strategy beyond. So effective intelligence, what is it and why do I need it? Well, again, you know, I've kind of beat this up a bit, but if you look over on the right, you can see that graphic. There's your data warehouse again, right? It's being fed by the systems, the EMR, the PM. Up top, these are the things that are not in a PM. Good workflow automation. In our case, we have a cloud workflow automation suite that can integrate to any PM, including our own. It integrates, and then you have a task management component to that as well. It's for all the other people that get involved in getting you paid what you're supposed to be paid on time, right? Those things are capturing structured data, which then goes back into data warehouse. And the output to the right is your effective intelligence algorithms, right? As you take that data, and you know, we've built quite a few, you know, that are targeting at labor and quite a few that are targeting the revenue cycle. Like, you don't have to look at your whole revenue cycle. If your problem is no authorization denials and it's tied to 3 physicians in 4 locations, start there. If 80% of your denials are coming from there, start there. Don't say I have a denial auth problem and overhaul the whole revenue cycle. Let's start there, you know. And so be very laser focused on where your issues are along your revenue cycle that are preventing you collecting what you're supposed to be collecting. Okay. So 20 years ago, it was all about access to reporting, then it was dashboarding, then it was cool bar charts and pie graphs at conferences, and I have this dashboard and that dashboard, et cetera, right? I'm kind of over all that. Then it was like, well, I've got all these cool pivot tables. I get my reporting at the end of the month. It takes me about 2 weeks to put the story together, and then I can decide what I want to do. But wait, I'm already halfway through the next month to act. So you have to have access to intelligence, not just reports in real time, especially if you outsource your revenue cycle. I cannot say that enough, right? You don't need reports, you need intelligence, right? There's a big difference. I can have 1,000 reports and 0 intelligence. So when you look at EIQ and this concept, and a lot of industries do this, it's why healthcare has not moved quickly in this arena. Surprises me a bit, but again, EMR systems don't capture the structured data in its entirety that's necessary to run these algorithms. And so when you look at some of the variables that will impact your revenue cycle effectiveness, you're looking at your net collection rate, debit AR over 60%, insurance right? Resolution rate, that's important. Claim resolution rate. It's also important to know the work effort to get to the claim resolution rate. Exhausted visits, lags, AR days, right? Those are some generic, old school ones. But at the end of the day, you start to take combination, and this is just a sample set, but combinations of metrics, and then you look at the labor side, and you look at, one, their production, but two, the resolution rate, benchmark to peers, amount collected that could have been collected, right, that should have been collected, touches to outcome, and you could look at everything from your charge teams, your payment teams, your coders, to your front office, pre-reg teams, the AR teams, right? Everybody who touches revenue cycle needs to have an EIQ assigned to them, right? And then you do a weighted average, and the way we look at it is below, near benchmark, at benchmark, or above, right? And you get a weighted scale. So you get a numeric score out that says, these are my most effective people, these are my least, and these are the areas of revenue cycle I need to focus on first. And these are the ones that are doing great, so don't worry about it. I'm going to run through just a handful of analytics slides, intelligence slides that are predicated off of some of the structured data that we capture, looking at views where you can kind of look across multiple key measures, some of which I just spoke about on the prior slide, in one view, right? So if I'm looking at, for example, your payers, I want to see charges, how they compared to the prior months. Are we up? Are we down? Looking at debit insurance AR, looking at net collection rates, looking at days in AR, looking at down here, number of claims that are being worked per person, number of FTEs that equates to, exhausted visits that keep getting followed up on with no outcome, patient searches. This is another one, right? If your people are choosing how they want to work, what they want to work, that's a problem. There shouldn't be a democracy in revenue cycle. Your AR team should be told what to do, and you should be able to have metrics in place to make sure they're adhering to that. Claim paid percent's a big one too. A lot of the AR that gets worked is already paid, just not posted. A lot of the AR that's being worked is in process. Why are you looking at it? Look, at day 15, from the time you were told it was in process and it's not paid, look at it. Don't look at it at day 2. Don't waste your time, okay? Small balance AR visits, right? At some point, you got to cut your losses, right? Define small balance. You got 20,000 claims on your open AR, but 80% of them are less than $100. With a cash value of Y, think about an AR strategy around that, okay? Net collection rate. Most of the PMs that I've run into, they just don't have a good single real-time view of this. And it troubles me, because when you start to look at the services that are being rendered, the charges generated based on those services, the payments collected against those charges, the contractualizations, the other adjustments, what's left, right? So the far right there, bill, in our terminology, that's your self-pay. That's what is owed by your self-pay piece. So that $525,000 from February 21, why wasn't that collected up front? Why is it still on the AR? All right, the no bill in our world is what's due by insurance. So I look at October 20 there, I see there's still almost $1 million that needs to be worked. Not all of that will come back in cash, but if half of that comes back in cash, that net collection rate of 86.7% is going to bump way into the 90s. Okay, so you have to have metrics that tell you the story on a macro level, whether your people are performing. At-risk AR. Again, another view that I've never seen in a PM. Metabol doesn't have the capability. Metabol's PM doesn't have the capability of creating this view. However, with the cloud workflow technology we've developed, plus the Metabol PM data, we actually can drive this view, right? So it's looking at those two components. But how many claims are out there? How many claims haven't been worked past 60 days? How many have been worked in the last, not in the last 6 to 12 months? What hasn't been paid, right? I want to look at AR balance minimum of $50, $100, $500. How many claims on the open AR have been touched 5, 10 times with no outcome, right? You should be able to plug and play these questions into a model like this and see it real time, and then start to drive prescriptive AR strategy or financial clearance strategy around the data. Okay, but access to intelligence is not mainstream in healthcare. Like I said, in healthcare revenue cycle piece, I don't see that ever being solved just from a PM and an EMR vendor, at least not in my time. Load balancing, again, why do you have so many claims assigned to one person and so few to the other? How many weeks is it going to take that person to get through backlog based on their productivity? How productive are they compared to their peers, right? How many actions is it taking for them to get an outcome, right? Why is one taking 1.8 actions and the other is 2.6? What's the 1.8 doing differently? Okay, and again, taking this data into an algorithm to create that EIQ score is where you need to go, right? Because you can look at views like this, which are great, but this is still not enough, right? I want it delivered to me. Just tell me which representatives here should be incentivized because they're so good and which ones I need to terminate or put on performance plans. Just bring it to my mobile device. I don't want to have to search for it. That's where we're headed as a company. Productivity monitoring, making sure that people are in line with their peers, people are in line with historical. Again, when we start getting into how AR moves, right? What's the work effort required to get that AR to move? Is it a lot? Is that because of first pass denials coming in on this population of claims? All these things are tied to getting you the intelligence to drive that improvement to net revenue to drive your margin. When are people at the graphic to the left, bottom left there, you're looking at when people are working. Nowadays with COVID and people working from home, this is important, right? I understand people have things going on in their home life that may have the necessity to work off hours at times, but again, they need to understand that you have access to this level of intelligence, which will drive accountability. Who's my most effective folks? This was a real scenario from 2.5 years ago where my least effective people were my highest paid, and my most effective were my lowest paid. That's a problem. Claim statuses. Again, I ask clients all the time, or prospects, okay, what's the status of your AR? Well, what do you mean? It's like, well, just tell me the status. Or, well, we don't know. Well, how do you work an account? Well, we put notes in. Well, notes is not structure. I can't do anything with notes, right? So are you capturing not only the statuses, but the actions your people are taking, right? In our world, it's activity, status, action. What activity did you take? I called the payer. What was the status? Claim was denied for medical necessity. What action did you take? I requested medical records. Great. All of those should be structured data points that are now captured and reportable. Why does my AR change, right? The big piece from month to month is knowing those non-contractuals. So, in our world, UCR write-off is contractual. But those miscellaneous adjustments, the bad debt write-offs, the office write-offs, right? Denials, avoidable, like those all have to be tracked in a very simple way for you to know where there's got to be areas to create intervention plans, right? Especially around the avoidable write-offs. Forecasting is another thing, right? When am I going to get paid? Well, one, how much? And two, when? Right? Algorithms can run this, but PM systems don't do it. So when you think about it, if I've got, X amount of millions of dollars sitting out there in balance, that's going to equate to a cash value, right? We have a pretty sophisticated algorithm now that actually estimates the liquidity on AR, but then you understand through historical payment patterns and payment statuses that these are payments that are going to come in historically in the next 14 days, next 15 days and beyond. So it helps you plan accordingly. This was really important when the pandemic started because you had this huge drop in revenue. And so physicians were freaking out like, oh my God, can I make payroll? When do I need to furlough? When is it starting to look better, right? And so these things were really important back then, but they still continue to be very important as you plan going forward. So I put the no more pivot tables in here. For you consultants on there, 13% consultants, you know what I'm talking about. Like, the reason I left Deloitte & Touche in 2006 to start my company, Interpoint, which was a workflow automation and analytics company, intelligence company, was I was tired of pivot tables. I'm not saying every once in a while I get to do one, but I want intelligence brought to me in seconds. I do not want to have to export and modify. The only time I really do pivot tables, sadly, is when I got a data request out to a new prospect, and now I have to spend 2 days deconstructing average to subpar data to try to build a narrative around ROI. It's really the only time. So if you're living in Excel, you're waiting until the end of the month, you're getting a bunch of random reports from your RCM company, and you're doing pivot tables, let's talk. So that's really the webinar. How did I do there? 12:13. All right. So I was trying to do it in 45 minutes or so to leave some time for Q&A if there are any. You know, when I think of the summary here is, look, you've got a number one challenge is that the PM systems that you're using to build claims do not capture the structured data in its entirety to tell you the story of effectiveness. Effectiveness for your labor teams in every area of your revenue cycle, and effectiveness for your revenue cycle. And that's a problem. That's a big problem. It's been a problem for 2 decades, but it's now even a more major problem because, one, we've got staffing shortages, people want more money, you've got ORs that are open, then they're closed, and they're open again, you have people delaying surgeries because they don't want to get COVID, right? All these things that are happening that are disrupting the revenue cycle. So now is the time to have lean, effective labor, the right technology in place, and most importantly, the right process to align that labor with the technology to get the result that you want, which is margin. Okay, so that's really the takeaway. We are spending majority of our R&D now on this EIQ concept, building out these sophisticated algorithms. There's no finish line, by the way, with EIQ. It's not like here are the variables and they're here to go. As you can grab more structured data from your vendors into a warehouse, you can build more sophistication around your EIQ. So it's like I say, it's like chasing the horizon line. You could say you'll reach it, but you won't. But you'll probably have a heck of a cool adventure trying to, right? So it's really, really important to understand that. So if there's questions, certainly ask. I think, Ashley, there's a few that have come in.
Yes, and certainly if you have any additional questions, feel free to type them in there in the question or the chat. So the first question is 3 parts. So how do you recommend dealing with the changing landscape of insurance denials?
Insurance is still deny claims? Man, that's a good one. Data. I'll tell you right now, I mean, the games in which insurance companies have historically and continue to play is astounding to me, given their massive profit margins. And so the most important thing, I just was on a call this morning with one of our large orthopedic groups, helping him build the case with a payer as to why he needs to increase his fee schedule. And we were looking at structured data around denials. We were looking at the gross collection rate compared to other like commercial plans. And so more accountability on the payer for why things are being denied. You know, why are we doing so much redundant back and forth? Because it's costing them money too, whether they know it or not. But it's really, really important. Keep in mind, with the way that the payment landscape's going, is that your dependency on the insurance money is lessening, right? More is going to the consumer, but that makes it more critical to make sure you're maximizing that insurance money, right? You can't afford avoidable write-offs anymore. So understanding the payers who are denying you and why, and understanding the people in the process responsible for that denial.
So I guess it's probably all related, but the rest of the question is for how do you recommend dealing with authorization obtained but surgery denied for doesn't meet medical necessity and no retro authorizations allowed anymore?
That's a very tactical question. I mean, I think that, again, there's a lot of companies that are promoting authorization tracking and automation. I'm suspect at this point on those companies. We've met with some to look at potential integration. But at the end of the day, if authorizations are still going to be a thing, then making sure that we understand those requirements prior to the service and we have the data to back it up is key. Anywhere you can automate that process, I would definitely look into that. There's no doubt in my mind that is going to continue to be a thing. It's just right now, I don't know how proven out those vendors are. And I don't have a lot of case examples to where automation of OS has been extremely effective. That's my opinion. I'm not saying that's truth. That's just my opinion at this point.
All right, another question is, what kind of ROI can I expect from implementing a workflow automation solution?
Well, I think the first thing you're going to find is your reduction in labor dependence. I'll give you a prime example. We installed our workflow analytics, our workflow automation system for a very large urology practice of ours a couple years ago, and it was wasn't quite beta, but it was beyond beta. She was thinking that she needed 12 AR reps to work her AR. Once we loaded it into workflow and carved out the nonsense, she needed 3.5, and now she has 2.5. So instead of hiring 7 to 8 bodies at $50K a pop fully burdened, she saved that money. Right, and that went straight to margin. So I think the first thing you see immediately is the reduction in labor dependence just to work your AR. There's no doubt about that. Most places we run into are overstaffed, and most of those places feel like they're understaffed. So that's one area. I think the other area on the front end is by centralizing pre-reg, if you haven't done so already, and putting the right workflow automation, financial clearance process in place, technology in place to drive accountability on those stats, you're going to see a huge reduction in first pass denials, and therefore a lot less dependence on labor to collect that money. So it's kind of a double edge there.
Great. And then the question came in, is there a formula for the effective intelligence quotient?
Yes. And again, it depends on what structured data you have access to today. We have a lot more flexibility in ours because we capture so much through our workflow automation technology, which then drives back into data warehouse for us. Depending on your situation, will depend on how sophisticated you can build that algorithm. And as I showed on that one example, you really have to look at key data points, and you have to weight those based on importance, right, and value. And it needs to be quantitative. It needs to be a quotient. You have to have a way of scoring that. And that then just creates a much more real-time access into where you need to look in terms of labor effectiveness and revenue cycle effectiveness.
Perfect. And then the last question is regarding a data warehouse. It seems intimidating. What do I look for, and how do I get started?
Well, it's not intimidating. I mean, it might seem intimidating, but you have the right to your data. You actually have the right to your data even if you have a cloud EMR PM. You'd be surprised how many times we're told by cloud EMR PMs that no, you can't access data. It's your data, you own it. If they won't give you data, get on a PM, they'll give you the data, right? If you don't have the structured data and the access to that to drive your margin and performance, which is what we talked about in the last 45 minutes or so, that's a problem, right? So data warehousing is not a new concept, right? We've been doing it for a long time. It's pulling in relevant and actionable structured data from multiple systems into a centralized warehouse. But the key is you have to have something on top of that warehouse, right? It's got to drive workflow, and it's got to drive analytics and intelligent analytics. It's got to drive those things. And a lot of times those things like workflow need to refeed back into warehouse, right? So if you're capturing a lot of structured data around tasking and workflow, it needs to go back into warehouse to drive even more sophistication on the intelligence and the EIQ, right? And so it's not really, let me think about getting a data warehouse. You got to have one, right? Either you build it or you have a vendor build it. But the key is what's actually feeding it, and then what are you doing with that data?
Great. I think that's all we have for today then.
Great, absolutely. Well, the contact information is there. If you have more questions around this topic, reach out. We'd be happy to talk about it. We're going to continue to push out a lot more content this year on EIQ. It is the future. We're spending most of our resources on today, and it seems to resonate with the market. So I appreciate your time. I know everyone's gone to too many webinars in the last 2 years. So I get it. And if we're at conferences together, come up to our booth and give us a holler. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.